We are recording. All right, welcome to Gateway API meeting for February 17. We have got a lot of interesting content. I'm looking forward to seeing, it looks like both how Istio is planning on using these APIs and Contour as well. Really interested in seeing the different approaches here. But before we get into that, I wanted to highlight release. Big thanks to Harry for getting this out. We have finally made it to 0.2.0. This is the first time that we've made a release, an incremental release after our V1 Alpha 1 release. This continues to use the V1 Alpha 1 API version, but it represents a point in time set of incremental updates that will be easier to reference. Everything is entirely backwards compatible. This is entirely additive or bug fixes or these kinds of things. There is a change log here that should provide more information. Yeah, so as an example, we now have the ability to have a set property on request headers. So a lot of things have happened in the past few months, and this tries to bundle them all up into a single, easier to consume release instead of just basing everything on our main branch. So this provides a little bit more stability. I think we had contributions from just about everyone to get this release out. So thank you. Feel pretty good about it. Any questions about this release strategy? I know it's a little bit strange to have both this semantic versioning and API versioning and have them be a little bit different. Does this make sense? Silence is great. All right. Let me see. This is the test of all the things. It looks promising. All right. I can see slides. Let me, hopefully everyone else can too. Let me see what happens if I present this. Okay, did that break everyone's view of my screen?
I still
It's
see
still
the
on the
videos.
dock. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we're just going to do somewhat larger. There we go. Okay, we'll run with this. John, I'll hand it over to you and just let me know when you want to move on to the next slide.
Yeah, we still can't see.
Oh, you can't see any. Oh, sweet. Okay.
Yeah. If we can't share it, it's probably fine. Most of the slides are about. I made them for unrelated purpose and kind of shoehorned the sidecar or service mesh stuff in it, so we can just talk about it.
Cool.
We can't get it to work.
We'll try one more time. Are you seeing anything when I share my screen?
Black.
Wow. How? So when I went to present, okay, that's fun. Okay, yeah. I'm not gonna question it. We can look at the slides individually then, and I'll try to recover my video separately from that.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just get started then. So yeah, so quick background. I work on Istio, and in Istio we have both an ingress and a service mesh using the same APIs, which are if you're not familiar, there's a gateway API, which is loosely related to the gateway API here, and the virtual service API, which is kind of like the routes. So they have a similar model somewhat. And so as we've been implementing the service APIs, we've been looking into whether we can, or how or whether it's possible to represent service mesh traffic using these APIs as well. Because today, an Istio user, they have one API that controls both ingress and mesh. And so if we are to push users to use the new gateway APIs, ideally we keep that experience as well. Like we don't want them to use this one routing API for their ingress and then a completely different one for their mesh, since that adds a lot of burden on them. So we've been looking into this a bit, and I don't have any concrete designs here yet. I just want to get some early feedback. And I was also curious about others. I know like Kong and Traffic both have sibling mesh projects. So I was wondering if any of those have thought of this as well. Here we go. Yeah, you can skip all the stuff unless you want an intro to the API and go down to like slide 15, I think.
15, all right.
Maybe 14, actually.
Sure.
Yeah, so basically the idea of the service mesh is it's actually very similar to Ingress in many ways. Like we still have some proxy that's in between the client and server, and it's still doing all the same type of stuff. But generally, in the Ingress case, there's one gateway, and you go from the client, which is generally external to the cluster, to some gateway, which does all the routing, load balancing, TLS, et cetera, and then it forwards to some backend. In the mesh case, it's much more common to have client in the cluster, and then we go through 2 hops of proxies, one attached to the client and one attached to the server before we reach the other destination. Okay. But ultimately, they're doing very similar things. And so we've, because of that, we thought that we could represent these with the same API potentially. So if you go to the next slide, in Istio today, we have this virtual service definition, right? And so if you wanted to define something at an ingress, you would specify in the gateways, this is like the ingress gateway, and say our host is, our external domain, like helloworld.example.com. And then for internal traffic, you just change the gateway name and probably also the host name as well to define, here's what happens when I send a request to the Hello World service in the default namespace. And then all the configuration is the same. So that's just some background on how it works in Istio. I think the main challenge is, if you go to the next slide, that we are trying to overcome in getting mesh traffic modeled with the gateway API is first, there's a lot more gateways to manage. Or more specifically, there's more proxies to manage. We've been kind of coming up with different ideas on how exactly we want to represent the physical proxies with gateways and routes, whether that's like one gateway per proxy instance or one per namespace, one global mesh gateway. The answer there is not clear to me yet, but there's certainly more things to manage, whereas in an ingress case, you typically have maybe one ingress pod running, or maybe a few. Here we're talking, potentially thousands. And so how we interact with things is potentially different, because if we had to make 1,000 gateway classes, 1,000 gateways, things can get kind of out of hand there for the user. The other one is that we have this notion of consumer and producer and overrides, which is a lot more important. Generally on Ingress, you just have like if I'm the Hello World developer, I set up my rules for how to reach Hello World. I set up the gateway on how to expose it, and everything's done by myself, because the clients are generally external and they can't configure anything. But inside the mesh, we have the consumer of these services is also in the mesh, and we want to allow them to override settings. So if I'm the Hello World service, I may define that I use the round robin load balancing policy, but another client doesn't have to listen to that, right? They're free to use their own load balancing policy, and we allow them to actually override settings on the server side. So today, that's not exactly clear how that will be modeled by the Gateway API. And the other one is that Ingress is opt-in. Like if you just set up an empty Ingress controller in all implementations I know of, it will do just return nothing or 404s for everything. For Mesh, we generally have it just drop in place and transparently proxy everything. And so we implicitly have routes to all services in the mesh. So we also need to have some way to represent this implicit behavior in the gateway, or in the gateway APIs. Since again, we don't want people to have to define 1,000 routes like in order to onboard their applications into the mesh. We want it to just be, check some box somewhere or install some configuration of, and then they get their sidecar proxy, which they can then incrementally add more and more features, but everything continues working out of the box. So that's the main things that we've come across. I'm starting to think about this a bit on how we can model these. I don't have anything concrete to like design review right now, but hopefully in the near future we will. So I was, I guess, wondering if anyone has any questions, feedback on this, if anyone else is thinking about this problem. or anything?
This is a relatively small question in the grand scheme of things here, but this is just another reminder that, of course, Istio has a gateway resource that is not the same as the gateway API gateway resource. I know that's going to be confusing for users. Have you thought about, like, I can't remember where we landed on that. It sounded like there would be a different way. You had a different short name or something for Istio gateways. To avoid
Yeah, we
that
do.
kind of
We do have a
conflict.
different short name for now. We also, like in our documentation, we always refer to it as the Kubernetes Gateway API, and then anywhere we're talking about them together, we also refer to ours as like the Istio Gateway. We may need like a better one that's like a different color on the website or something. I don't know, because it is very confusing. But I don't know. We'll find a way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, this is really cool. I think that this diagram is helpful in seeing this. So as I understand it right now, you already have this experimental working, and this side is more theoretical and not quite sure, but maybe.
Yeah, like the left side, we do have experimental support. The right side, I mean, technically it works because of the implicit behavior I mentioned, but you can't actually configure anything. So,
okay. Yeah, makes sense. Cool. Any other questions? Bowie's asking in chat if there are any areas API could focus on for sidecar use cases. I don't know, John, you probably have some perspective here.
Yeah, I think so. Right now, I don't think we have a clear idea of exactly how we want like the API resources to map to like the physical proxy resources and how like things are set up. So I think the most important step is figure out how we can do that, whether that's using the existing APIs in potentially creative ways, or making small tweaks to the API. I don't really know, but I think that's really the first step, and then hopefully, like ideally, some of the other meshes out there would also be involved in this, because I don't want, like, if we do what I described as a creative representation of the API, where like a special annotation or something even more implicit means like mesh or something, then it loses a lot of the benefits of portability, right? So it would be great if we had other meshes also interested in this, so that we can make sure that we take a consistent approach, and build a model that works for others as well. I think that Istio in general, compared to other meshes, there's nothing that unique about it in terms of this problem. I think the biggest thing is more that we have a deeper integration with mesh and ingress together in the same API, whereas others either have a different ingress implementation or different APIs from what I've seen. And I could be wrong there. But fundamentally, I suppose that would change if everyone adopts the gateway APIs. That would be the common API between not just the mesh and the ingress, but also the different projects. So.
Yeah, this is really interesting. Definitely, we've covered a lot for ingress, and I think that's still primarily what we're aiming for, but this is interesting because there is a lot of overlap here. So interesting to see what you find, and if any other projects have been thinking of these APIs the same way as, well, we can do ingress, but we could also do more. Because, yeah, Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I guess any other questions I missed? Yeah, I'll leave it there then. Danian or Steve, do you want to go through Contour and what you're working on?
Yeah, let me go ahead and share my screen. I'll lead the discussion, and then Steve, please jump in, or I'll defer to you certain areas. Let me see. See how I share my screen here. All right, where is the sharing screen? Oh, just sharing. Oh, can I? Guess I should have tried the screen sharing before. Why isn't my Mac letting me share my screen?
I'm just glad I'm not the only person who has issues with screen sharing. It's always fun.
Here it is. Okay, hold on one second. I think I got it.
No worries, and I don't mind if my screen share works again. I don't mind running through docs too. Whatever's easiest for you.
Oh, I have to. Looks like I have to quit and reopen to allow screen sharing from my Mac. Let me do that and bounce right back here.
Cool, sounds good.
Test 1, 2, 3. Can everyone hear me?
Success. Well done.
All right. Okay. And you can see my screen, I assume?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. And I don't know how to get this whole control thing out of the way. Oh, that's horrible.
Oh, yeah, that's the worst.
Oh, my gosh. You got to be kidding me. Let me clean this up. Okay. I think I'm in a place where I can start to have a conversation with everyone. Thanks for your patience. So I think the first thing you'll see here is the Gateway APIs implementation actually spans across two components. The primary component, Contour, as well as a new component called Contour Operator. And feel free to click on either of these designs to find out the details. I'm going to kind of cover the designs at a high level. And then as of like about an hour ago, I actually have things working. So I wanted to just take a moment and just walk through a quick demo. So the implementation, as I mentioned, is split across the operator and Contour. We felt that, see here, we felt that with Gateway APIs, as we all know, there are the different personas, and the operator really aligns to kind of the persona for managing the cluster, managing the infrastructure. And so the operator is responsible for watching the gateway instances of gateways, instances of gateway classes, as well as our custom resource Contour. Prior to Gateway API support, the Contour operator would watch this custom resource and then instantiate a Contour environment. And when I say a Contour environment, it creates a contour deployment, an Envoy daemon set, all the other child resources that are necessary for instantiating a contour environment, like the config map that contour uses to configure itself, secrets to secure the communication between these two. And for those that are unfamiliar with contour, just think of contour as a control plane for Envoy, and contour supports and implements APIs such as the Ingress API. There's also a custom resource HTTP proxy that Contour supports, and it newly supports the gateway APIs. But again, as I mentioned, going back here, it's not going to support all the gateway APIs. It's really meant to be a layer 7 component, or a layer 7 implementation. And so it's going to be watching the layer 7 or the route types, and specifically the layer 7 route types, HTTP proxy or HTTP route, a TLS route, and so forth. There are no plans to implement and support UDP route, TCP route, and so forth. And again, the Contour operator, it's really focused on these 3 resources. We all know that gateway class, it points to or references a CRD, and this Contour is a CRD. And what else here do I want to mention? Again, feel free to kind of look at the details. We spent quite a bit of time going through the design for Contour as well as Contour operator. Yeah.
Sorry, I just had one question on that diagram there. It makes it look like Contour operator is the one that's reading from gateways as well as gateway class. Is that accurate? Like,
that is accurate.
So the gateway would get, okay, so the gateway represents a Contour deployment, or maybe
an instance of Contour. So
okay,
gateway represents an instance of Contour. And again, that instance of Contour is, everything from the daemon set that manages Envoy, the deployment that manages Contour.
Yeah.
Now, there would be another block here for Contour that would also be reading or for example, writing status to this gateway, right, for the gateway listener.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And it would also have another arrow for the HTTP route and TLS route that it's watching for these, and then programming, right? Programming Envoy here, right? So go ahead.
If I'm understanding this correctly, Contour operator sends some kind of hint or indication to Contour deployment that it is representing this specific gateway.
Yeah, so there's a configuration component. Let me actually just show you really quick here. So here is the config map to configure Contour, and so when Contour starts up, it's going to be looking for gateways in this namespace named this. Mm-hmm. Now, currently, the Contour operator would, like according to this diagram here, right? It's going to be watching for these gateways, and then it would program the config map to say, hey, I found a gateway named foo in namespace bar. Let me configure the config map here, right, that you see here with foo bar, and then instantiate Contour, and Contour knows that its gateway, is foo bar.
Cool. Okay, that makes sense.
Right, and so if we go back to like the personas here, right? The infrastructure team is really going to be interfacing with the operator. If I had a block that showed the operator here, they're going to be interfacing with the operator to manage the infrastructure, right? And it's the app developers who really don't care about all these details, right? They just want to look at their gateway class and say, oh, you know, I want to create an internal or a public facing route. So I'm going to go ahead and create a route that references a particular gateway.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so you know that's kind of that division here, right? So if we drew kind of a line here that says, okay, operator is up here managing these components, interacting with platform providers and platform operators, and then it's you know, it's the application developers that will just be dealing with their route resources. And then, you know, we spent a lot of time just trying to find, okay, where is that dividing line? How does the operator and contour interact with each other? And again, I'm diving into the operator design. There's also the design on the contour controller itself. And both reference each other and their relationship. So feel free to take a look at the design specs and give us feedback. Definitely would appreciate different sets of eyes on the approach that we're taking here. Is any questions so far?
Yeah, I was really interested in the use of the operator. I was thinking about this a lot with the Istio implementation as to whether, like, does a gateway instantiate an actual Envoy deployment, or does it just reference an existing one? I was curious, do you expect users or support running without the contour operator and like provisioning everything manually and linking them up?
So let me address your first question. So a gateway is an instance of a contour environment, right? So no gateways means no functioning contour, no Envoy daemon set, all that stuff, right? And so you need to create a gateway, and a gateway, again, is an instance of contour. Without gateway APIs, that's what this contour CRD was all about, right? The operator would look at the CRD and say, oh, I need to go ahead and create a contour environment. What we've done now is we've added a field to the CRD that basically tells the operator, hey, don't go provisioning a contour environment just because this CRD exists, right? So we added some logic there. So now the contour operator basically says, okay, contour's here, and it's referencing a gateway class. So this contour is invalid until the reference gateway class exists, and that I then validate this gateway class, and this gateway class references this contour. So right now there's kind of that bi-directional relationship. It's something that we're still iterating on to see if that is the right approach or not, but that's what we've settled on for the time being. So there's now that kind of a relationship between the gateway class that we know points to CRD, and then the CRD actually references the gateway class, and that allows the operator to supply some status to say, hey, these two components reference each other. They're both valid, so they're ready to use. Go ahead, anyone who wants to create a gateway, right? And this person up here, this platform operator says, okay, let me create this gateway. Contour operator sees it and says, a gateway means I need to go ahead and create a contour environment. Now your second question, John, I think maybe I lost track of it. Could you repeat the second question?
My first one was second. Was it like, do you require users to use the operator to use the APIs? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you need the contour operator to use contour today, right?
Correct. So you don't need the operator to use contour today. If you go to project contour, getting started, right, you have a few options. Before, up until recently, it was just this quick start, right? It's so, you know, we maintain this rendered manifest that I think I showed you somewhere around here, right? So let's see here, examples. So this rendered manifest is just an easy way, like an all-in-one manifest that can be used for the getting started. In 1.11, we added support, alpha support for the operator. And so, yes, you need the operator to support gateway APIs. The plan is that we also provide an option B for users that don't want to use the operator. And there's going to be some type of limitation there. So it's something that we're still, some of the details we're still working through. Steve Sloka is on the call, who has been a Contour maintainer for a long time. Steve, do you want to add anything to this topic?
Yeah. I mean, the operator isn't required. You could just create so today, like to spin up Contour, you just need to deploy Contour and then Envoy, and Envoy is set with a type load balancer. So if you're in some sort of environment that can read that type load balancer, service type load balancer, then it'll all link up. So in Gateway API, you just have to create the gateway and then tell Contour, hey, I'm using this gateway. So I guess we've decided that one gateway maps to one instance of Contour. So you can't have 3 different gateways all being configured by one instance of Contour. In that example, you'd have to have 3 different installations of Contour. But yeah, you should totally be able to either use the operator if you'd like to or not, or if you don't want to, you're not required to.
Yeah, I think the challenge we get to using gateway APIs with Contour alone that we've discussed is you can go ahead and create an instance of a gateway, but there needs to be some kind of active controller that is supplying status for the gateway and so on and so forth. So so that's just something to keep in mind as well.
Cool. Yeah, that's really useful. I think I didn't fully understand that the gateway was one-to-one with the Envoy deployment. So you expect then like all the TLS stuff would be done at the route level, I would imagine.
And then we can see how it looks.
Or I guess it's not necessarily like you'd have one centralized gateway that could have TLS settings, right? But if you needed to.
So from an operator standpoint, we follow the same process that the quick start follows, where a job gets created that creates secrets for Contour and Envoy that are used by Contour and Envoy for securing that communication between them. We do have some plans to extend how we manage certificates that I think will fall into support for gateway APIs. It gives us kind of more flexibility on where we manage the certificates from either at the route level or at the gateway level. But really quickly too, just show you nodes.
Just one quick follow-up on that. In practice, how common, how much do you think that people will use multiple, like a single gateway to represent a large set of domains and TLS for them, or they'll just run lots of different gateways and instances of Contour, one per domain approximately?
I think in the history of Contour, we typically see just like an external instance that gets deployed and everything runs through that.
Okay.
Usually when there's more than one, the use case is typically an external one and an internal one. So like Knative does this. They'll have like an external ingress controller and then an internal one to do different types of routing. But other folks, depending on their needs, there's always different needs. So they'll have different, they'll have more instances to kind of separate out the traffic across different entry points, I guess.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I think what I'm hearing from this is this will be a good use case of kind of larger gateways, like gateways that contain a lot of config. And we'll just need to make sure our API handles those use cases well. And I think a lot of implementations will be having similar logic. It's just good to see.
Rob, this actually brings up a point we were discussing earlier this week for the GKE gateway controller about route isolation and making sure that the sharing of gateways is safe. We were just kind of identifying all the areas, and like, for instance, one is obviously just merging in conflicts, which is specified by the API, but there's probably details within each implementation that will kind of be more specific than what the API says. And then also misconfigurations, making sure that a misconfiguration or any kind of configuration on one route can't prevent the reconciliation of other routes. And then also kind of eventing and status, making sure that like if people who have access to the routes are deploying them, that they are getting the right status to tell them they've done something wrong, and that the operator is getting the right kinds of status to tell them that something is going on. Like in cloud, one example would be like a quota for a certain resource has been reached, which is something that probably the route owner needs to know, that why their route isn't getting applied, but also is something the gateway owner needs to know because they probably have the power to go change quotas for the project or something like that. So that's something that is probably good for a discussion at the same point. It's definitely more of an implementation specific thing, but it does affect all of us.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It seems like there's a fair amount of overlap in the kinds of issues we'll end up hitting, especially like GKE, as you mentioned. We're also anticipating gateways with shared workloads. Yeah. Cool. Sorry to interrupt you, Damien.
Yeah, no problem at all. So I just wanted to run through really quickly. I've got a Kind cluster running on my laptop. So you've got a single control plane node, worker node. I'm actually running the operator locally. As I mentioned, I just got this working maybe an hour plus ago. And so let's go ahead and instantiate my gateways. So creating my namespaces that I need, creating the gateway class, the contour custom resource that the gateway class refers to, and the gateway. And what you can see here, right? So again, the CRD is exposing kind of infrastructure specific information, right? Since this environment's going to be running locally, I expose node ports on my laptop instead of creating a service of type load balancer, for example, right? So this is where we get into network publishing details. See here, gateway class, right? Pretty basic, refers to this contour CRD, and then we've programmed the operator to look for this specific controller string to manage gateway classes by this name. Let's see here.
Just one follow-up there. I know that now that we're moving towards namespace scoped gateway parameters, gateway class parameters, this allows you to do that reference, that parameters reference to a namespace scoped resource. You said there was something about a handshake. Do you still need the gateway class reference in Contour? Like basically they both have to agree here?
That's what we came up with, is that without a gateway class reference, it tells the operator that it is not operating in gateway API mode, and says so when gateway class reference, which by default doesn't exist, okay, that would tell the operator, okay, I'm not operating in gateway API mode, so I need to go ahead and act on this contour by creating a contour environment. By having the gateway class ref, it says, okay, I'm now in gateway API mode. let me go ahead and fetch this gateway class, make sure it exists, because if it doesn't exist, then I'm going to go ahead and supply status to this contour saying that, you know, it's not ready.
Makes sense. Cool.
All right, so we see by creating the gateway class, gateway and contour, we actually now have contour and Envoy running. Okay, awesome. So now let's create a sample application. We use the card app. Let me go ahead and create that. And let me actually show you what it looks like really quick. It's all standard, right? A deployment that's being used to manage the card app, a service, and then here's what we really care about is the route. Let's see if it's ready to go. The pods are running, service is cluster IP, and we have the app or the HTTP route. We could curl the endpoint. Yeah, you can actually, if you want to see what it looks like here. All right, and if I go ahead and delete route, no longer have the route, and we no longer have the app. Can't hit the app anymore. So that's it. I mean, not all that fancy, but we've got something working now, and still a lot to iterate on, improve, but we've got that first benchmark of something working.
That's really cool. Awesome to see. I have to ask, you know, you've worked through this API a lot. You've implemented most of it, it looks like. Were there pain points that that came up where things didn't feel natural or felt like they could be improved?
You know, I'm still trying to digest you know, some of the pain points we've already addressed, as you know, Rob. You know, not being able to reference a namespace scoped CRD for gateway class, that was an issue, and I'm glad to see that we were able to work through that actually pretty quickly too. So that was really nice. I'd say right now that's probably the biggest thing that stands out. I would say the other area is still just, you know, trying to establish that mental model. And there's a lot of moving pieces between the contour CRD, the gateway class, gateway, the routes. And so, you know, it's still really trying to establish that mental model of how not only everything works together, but it's like, okay, when we have this stitching together of resources is, you know, having to supply the correct status based on the different relationships and what's the status of those relationships. And so that kind of dependency graph between the two and properly reflecting status for each of those resources is still something that that I'm working through.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think exactly what you're saying, the relationships and making sure status is consistent is going to be a challenging part of the API and the less fun part, because you can get everything working without that. And so you can get to your demo state, everything works, and then all the less fun things. Yeah, but this is really cool. I'm excited to see this come together. Do you have any idea? I think last you mentioned maybe April, May, you might have something like ready for general public use case for this.
Yeah, I'll let Steve keep me in line here if he thinks otherwise, but we've been really cranking away. It's why I've been pretty silent in the Gateway API community, because I've been so focused on the implementation. But we cut V113 next week, next Wednesday or Thursday. I think it's 24th, and I'm hoping to have these PRs that enable all this functionality that I showed you by that time. So yeah, that'd be great. I mean, it'll definitely be, early adopter experimental use, but at least something that people can start, have a snapshot release that people can start playing around and giving us feedback. Steve, do you want to add anything there?
No, yeah, what Dan just showed was we just merged a PR that gives you initial support for routes and such. There's still a lot to go with in terms of we don't have status updating and those sort of things. So lots of to-dos throughout the code, but yeah, no, I think it'll come together quickly once, now that we have these bits stuck in there, we can just iterate on the implementation. So yeah.
Yeah, 113 next week's experimental use, and then we release every month. So I would see big changes between 113 and 114. But again, at least 113, it gives someone, it gives users the ability to just start kicking the tires, giving us feedback and so forth.
That's awesome. Cool. Looking forward to trying that out. Yeah, and any other comments, questions about this implementation?
Yeah, one thing that I find kind of interesting is that I think there's 3 implementations that I know of, at least Traffic, Contour, and Istio. And while we're all using the same APIs, we all have different ways that the user interacts with those to achieve the same thing. So like the routes, I think, are very portable, but like in the traffic case, they obscure the gateway is even existing at all, right? The user just sees routes. In the Contour case, the gateway is kind of one-to-one with this actual deployment. So they generally have one gateway, I would imagine, for most cases. And then in Istio, we have potentially like multiple gateways that we're merging together that are associated with one, actual Envoy deployment. So I don't know. I don't have a conclusion. I just have the start of this the statement that it seems like we were kind of drifting, and I'm not sure if that's something that we want to address in some way, or if that's just the nature of the different implementations, or what we should do there.
Comment from Bowie in chat that was on purpose and nature of ingress implementations. I think it's good to point out and good to keep an eye on. I know next week we want to go through, I think Mark might go through what we're planning for GKE for these APIs, and maybe we'll start to see some overlap between all these different implementations. I know when I first looked at Trafic, I thought that they really obscured gateway away, but I think I misunderstood that, and it was more just a, they're hiding it in their Helm chart, but it's not that gateway resources themselves are ignored entirely. So I think there's maybe less differentiation than it seems, but that specific point you made, John, about gateway merging, like whether there's a single instance of an implementation per gateway or a instance of an implementation for all gateways of, let's say, a certain class or maybe multiple classes. I imagine that's going to have a fair amount of variation. Yeah, that's a good point. Good to keep an eye on it anyway. Cool. All right, let me, there were a couple things left on the agenda, and I know we're just about at time, so I want to make sure that we have time to cover these. Hopefully, well, brief segue. Is my screen share actually working again? I've had very mixed luck with this.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. Cool. Harry had added something to the agenda. I don't think he's here right now, but I think mostly just to highlight the issues we currently have that we anticipate will be breaking changes. I think we have enough here that we, it seems like V1 Alpha 2 is inevitable. And as we're getting these initial implementations out the door, really want to make sure that we keep these kind of breaking changes in mind, but maybe even more importantly, understand any changes we need to make based on initial user feedback that would be more significant. I think most of these are relatively small, very easy to convert back, back and forth. But I feel like there's more lurking out there that we're unaware of right now. So definitely would be good to identify any potential breaking changes sooner than later, because although we probably need a V1 Alpha 2, I would love to get this to beta, this year, at least, maybe this summer, but soon. So I don't want to just have an API that stays in alpha forever. So identifying any kind of breaking changes soon in the next month or two will be really helpful, so we can prepare for a release with those. So I don't know that we have enough time to work through each one of these in this meeting, but just a reminder that we do have this breaking change label. We do have the V1 Alpha 2 milestone. I know we've kind of used them interchangeably. Like if we think that something would be a breaking change, sometimes we just mark it as V1 Alpha 2 because we can't deal with it right now. But also the breaking change label. So just be aware of that. And please, if you think of anything that we should change, that would be a breaking change, the sooner we can start processing it, the better. Yeah. And the next one I wanted to dig into a bit is a relatively significant change to our docs generation. Our docs have been hosted on GitHub Pages. If for any of you, I think everyone's made some kind of contribution to our site now, probably our docs specifically, and it's a pain. You have to run local docs generation to convert everything into HTML. In addition to that, we ran into this unfortunate thing where there was no way to redirect from our old GitHub Pages URL to our new GitHub Pages URL. Unfortunately, we should have made this change, this adjustment to go to Gateway API to use this kind of subdomain before we made the change, because then we'd have redirect capabilities and more. But that's what I'm working on now. So this will give us a lot more advanced functionality in our docs. I'm really looking forward to it. If you want, this is really similar to other Kubernetes repositories where Netlify bot automatically builds and previews your docs pages for you. So this PR is almost ready. I could use some more eyes. But one of the things I want to highlight is we now have these fun things down here. Most importantly, this deploy one. If you click on the details for it, it shows you a preview for that branch, for that PR, of exactly what your documentation looks like. You can see that probably our most complicated thing is our reference documentation, which fortunately works just fine. You can see, believe it or not, we brought search back because we no longer have to deal with conflicts. Yeah, I'm excited about this, but it's a huge diff because it's removing all our generated docs in favor of Netlify. and in favor of no more conflicts. So if anyone has time to take a look today, that would be great. I'd love to get this out this week. Would love to have a better domain and more control over this and a better development process. So yeah, I think that's all on this one. We are at time, so I don't want to take any more of your time. But yeah, please take a look this afternoon if you have time. And thanks so much for taking the time to run through these introductions, both John, Danian, Steve, of what Contour and Istio are doing. And I think we'll try and get something on next week for what we're trying to do for GKE as well. So we can look through that approach as well. And yeah, I think that's all for this week. So thanks to everyone for coming out. Talk to you next week.